Good afternoon. In this video, I want to briefly look at a point that Labarum 312 was making in regard to my point that Tyndale, who invented the word Passover, coined the word Passover for Pascha, in fact, kept the word Easter for Acts 12:4. And it was, according to Labarum, his view was that, well, the word Passover didn't exist when he first put out. Tyndale put his New Testament out. It was 1527, and the word Passover came later. But the fact of the matter is that by 1530, Tyndale had uh, translated the word, had translated the Pentateuch, and didn't have, in fact, coined the term Passover. So, and he kept the word Easter throughout his New Testament to refer to the Passover. He was making a distinction between the Old Testament and New Testament, and gradually the word Easter was phased out in the later, certainly by the King James Bible and the Geneva Bible before that, to where the pascha always meant Passover, except for one case in Acts 12:4 where the King James translators uh, kept it in because it referred to the resurrection, and that was the connotation that Easter would have had for the first century Christians, and that was what Harold was waiting for to end that day, the resurrection day. But the point is that Passover certainly did exist the word Passover did exist by 1534, and which by 1530 and by 1534, Tyndale had made his another edition of his New Testament, and so he could have used the word Passover, but he chose to use the word Easter throughout that New Testament, referring to Passover. In Acts 22:1, he does the same thing, and so the fact that the word didn't exist is not what limited Tyndale. The fact is that he had coined the word by 1530. 1534, he chose to use the word Easter in the New Testament, kept the word Passover in the Old Testament, and that's the connotation that eventually began to develop in the English translations. That Passover was a Old Testament connotation, had an Old Testament connotation, and Easter had the New Testament connotation, referring to the resurrection. Passover referring to the death of Christ. And so, while Pascha was eventually translated in all cases as Passover, in the final Acts 12:4, the King James translators rejected the Geneva Bible's change to Passover and put back in the word Easter, seeing that the day had actually passed. The Passover day was not the Jewish day anymore. So it had to be referring to the Christian day, and that's the connotation of the resurrection, and that's why they kept the word Easter in there. So, but the word did exist by 1534, when Tyndale had the opportunity to put the word in there, Passover, but kept using the word Easter in place of the word Passover for Pascha, so they could be used interchangeably in English until the actual 1611, when Easter is used one time and it had a resurrection connotation, and could not be referred to the Jewish Passover, which represented just the death. So Easter encompassed both the death, burial, and resurrection, which of course is with the gospel. The gospel isn't limited to the death of Christ. It entails the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And so the Easter feast, the Easter days would have seen all three, and not just the death. So it's an important aspect of the gospel. But again, the word did exist in Tyndale's time. And by Tyndale, he did create it by 1530. 1534, the New Testament was made, and he had decided to keep the word Easter in the New Testament, and for having a New Testament type of connotation, referring to the resurrection, and using Passover from the Old Testament. And gradually, in the English Bibles, Pascha came to mean the Old Testament view of the death of Christ, while one time was used in Acts 12:4 is a reference to the resurrection of Christ, the resurrection day, the resurrection that the first century Christians were celebrating during that same feast day, feast period. Amen. Thank you.